Hi everybody, I'm coming to you today to talk to you about your first paper for this class, and that is a description paper. Alright, so I'm going to do this. So we're going to talk about description today, and I'm going to just record my notes. Normally I give this lesson on a whiteboard, so this is me giving you the lesson like I would give it to you in my on-ground class. So here's some things you need to know about description. First of all, the point of writing description is to hit on your five senses. All right, so we're describing. That's the idea. Well, what in the world am I supposed to describe? Well, the answer is you're supposed to describe what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? So on. And so we're really going to be looking at our five senses with this particular paper. Here's a couple things you need to know about it. First of all, it is not a story. Okay, I'm going to repeat that a lot because I do not want you to tell me a story. Story is narrative. That's not the paper we're writing. In fact, our next paper is narrative. So I do not want you to tell me a story. Description is different. So what does that mean? Since it's not a story, what's the difference? Well, the answer is it does not use time. Time does not move in this paper. You're merely describing a moment. And so the way I tried to explain that is think of a photograph. In a photograph, is there time? No. So if I wrote about what I saw in that photograph, time wouldn't move. I would use my five senses to describe what I see, or if, what I heard in that moment, if it's a picture of me, what I was hearing in that exact moment, and what I was seeing, and what I was smelling, and what I was feeling in the moment that picture was taken. But what would happen is nothing would move because there is no time. So this is description, not narrative, so don't tell me a story, so you shouldn't have time. Okay? There are two types of description. One is objective, and the other is subjective. Now, here's the way I remember the difference between them. Okay? Do objects have feelings? No. So objective description would have no feelings attached. All right? It would just be merely describing, giving you the information. Subjective, on the other hand, also would give us some kind of feeling. What is it as the observer or the reader of your description, and am I supposed to feel about this particular moment? All right, so, you're trying to convey a particular feeling about the moment that you're describing. We call that, so this is the one that you'll be doing, this one right here, subjective, okay, for this particular assignment. And we call that feeling, and the book calls it that too, the dominant impression. Okay, so what is the impression you're trying to leave me with? So maybe it's that moment that you're standing with your toes in the sand on the beach, which would be really nice right now. And there are a couple of different dominant impressions you could give. Maybe it's sadness because it's your last day at the beach and you have to leave. So maybe the feeling that you're trying to convey in that moment is sadness. Or maybe it's peace. Maybe standing right at the water's edge. That feeling that takes over you is the feeling of just pure peace and happiness. And so that would be the dominant impression that you would try to convey. Why is this important? Because it will determine what types of details you give us. Because you only want to give us details that then describe that dominant impression. So if you're wanting us to feel peace, you wouldn't also give us details that convey sadness. That wouldn't make any sense. So you'll have to decide what your dominant impression is going to be so that you can then decide what types of details you include. Okay, so the next part to this is then you choose, go away, is your topic. Okay, so putting these two together will really create the bones of the paper. What is the feeling I'm trying to convey, and then what's my topic? Well, remember that your topic for me, or for most description, is to describe the moment. Remember, there's no time. It's not a story. So you're not moving through time. You're not telling us about how something happened. You're merely stopping in that one moment and giving us those details that help us understand that dominant impression. For this particular paper, the topic that you're going to write about is yourself. I want you to describe yourself. The interesting thing about being online is most of us have never seen each other. So this is your opportunity to describe yourself to us so that we know this is what you look like. Okay? So the topic is you. So you'll have to decide, what dominant impression do you want to make? What overall impression do you want us to get about you? Okay, maybe it's that you're smart or you're athletic or whatever that may be. Whatever that impression is that you're trying to give off, that will then determine the details you will use to describe yourself. But your topic for this paper is yourself, to describe yourself. Okay? If we put these two together, the dominant impression and the topic, that will lead us to our thesis. Okay? Your thesis needs to have these two elements. They need to give us A, your topic, and B, your dominant impression. So a sample thesis statement would be something like, all of the different attributes of me show that I am a runner. And so maybe that's the dominant impression I want to give you. I am a runner. And so maybe that's the impression that I'm trying to give is, I'm a runner. So if my dominant impression is that I'm a runner, then I would choose details to describe myself that would show you that. So maybe what I talk about is that my hair is almost always in a ponytail. Unless I'm, working, I'm actually teaching, my hair is pretty much always in a ponytail. I keep it long on purpose so that I can do that. And I almost always wear lipstick, and I wear the long-lasting lipstick because I want to look good in my race pictures, and I know that sounds silly, but by the end of a half marathon, I look pretty awful. And so I always like to wear really bright lipstick because it makes me feel good. When I'm not teaching, I'm usually in some kind of athletic clothes, usually some kind of Nike, top and pants, because that's what most of my wardrobe looks like. Also, most of my t-shirts have 5K, 10K, half marathon written on them somewhere. So those are things that you would notice. I pretty much only wear tennis shoes outside, again, of teaching because they tell me I need to dress like a grown-up there. But outside of that, I wear tennis shoes almost all the time. And you would notice other things. My skin is a little dark already. I'm already getting some sunshine because I run all winter long. So I'm not quite as pale as a lot of people because I spend a lot of time outside even when it's cold. One of my toes has a Band-Aid on it because I got a rock stuck in my shoe and it rubbed on my toe the other day when I was running. So you'd notice that if I was wearing sandals. So things like that. So the details that I choose to include will have to be related to the dominant impression that I'm trying to give. All right, so then we get to details. All right, so what kind of details do you need to include? Well, first of all, of course, you want to hit those 5 senses. After I come back from a run, let me tell you, nobody wants to stand around me. I reek to high heaven. So maybe if this is the moment that I've crossed a finish line, one of the things you would definitely notice is the smell. So I would probably hit on that one. What would you hear in that moment? You would probably hear me crying because crossing the finish line is really emotional, especially the long distance, so a half marathon, something like that. I usually end up crying by the end. That's just something I do. And, what would you smell? Like I said, would probably be something really gross. What would you feel? The reason that I love running is I love the feeling of accomplishment and success that I get when I cross the finish line, especially when other people do it with me. So there's some, details I would include that relate to my 5 senses. Okay, the other thing I want to make sure that you understand is this idea of show, don't tell. Okay, so let me write that out. Here's what I mean by that. I want you to show me these things. I don't want you to tell them to me. So instead of telling me that you are tall, I want you to show me that you're tall. How are you tall? Maybe you have to duck under doorways. Maybe you're 6'2". So give us those details that show us instead of just telling us I'm tall, because I'm 5'4". So most people in the world are tall to me. So I want you to show me exactly how tall are you. I had a friend, when I stood up next to him, I almost came up to his elbow. He was so tall. That's really tall. So that's a way to show that he's tall instead of just telling you, oh, my friend's really tall. So that's one of the things I want you to consider as you're working out these details. Where are places that I can show these details rather than just tell you these details? So I could tell you that I stink when I cross a finish line, or I could show you that I stink. You can see the sweat on my shirt, and you can see the salt that kind of crusts on my skin after being out on the road that long. So I can show you those details instead of tell you them. So that's a huge part of the success of a description paper, is that you're able to show what you're trying to get across instead of just tell us what you're trying to get across. So, I could tell you that I have really ugly toes. Because I do so much running. I do treat myself to a pedicure once a month, and I usually get something like hot pink on my toes just because I like it when I'm running. So, I can tell you those kinds of things, or I could show you, my hot pink toes that always end up chipped 2 days after I get them done because they, are in tennis shoes all the time. So I can show you those things instead of tell you. Okay. So once you have your details, you have to decide how you're going to organize them. Actually, let me back up 1 second. To plan out your details, may I suggest that you make out a chart, okay? And you list your 5 senses out, and under each of those, you write out some of the details that you can include. So for example, under C, what are a couple of the details I could include that relate to my dominant impression and my topic? Okay, so this is how I would plan out your details, is I would write out, okay, here's some details of what I see. Here's some details of what I would hear in that moment if I was in that moment, okay? So when we stop and we pause and we look at you in whatever moment that is, my example is crossing a finish line. What do we see? What do we hear? What do we feel that relates to you and then relates to that dominant impression? Okay, so then you have to decide how you're going to organize all of these details, because everything needs to be organized. You need to have a plan for how you're going to put all these details together. I don't want you to chase squirrels everywhere. I want you to have a plan. This is where a little bit of pre-writing will be really helpful. So there are 3 main ways to organize a paper. The first is chronological. Okay, that is, we organize in the order that things happen. Okay, so this is organized by time. Obviously, we're not using that for this paper. This will work great for narrative to tell us the story in the order that it happened, but we don't have time in this paper. You're not telling me a story, so chronological doesn't work. So the other 2 options are spatial and emphatic. Okay, so here's the difference between them. Spatial relates to space, where things lie in space. So for example, if you were going to use this to describe yourself, you would either start top to bottom or left to right. So in the example that I gave you, I started with my hair's always in a bun. So I started from the top, worked my way down. So I actually organized in a spatial way, in the way that things are organized in space. The other is emphatic, and this is that we emphasize by point, okay? So maybe I choose the weakest sense, maybe that's what I smell, and I put that first, because you always want to put your weakest points first, and then finish with your strongest points, okay? So maybe for this one, I put my weakest sense first, and then I finish with my strongest sense, probably what I see. So that is how I would do emphatic. So you can see by space, I'm organizing by where things lie. By emphatic, I'm organizing by the different points that I'm going to make. And I organize them by least strong to the strongest point that I will make. Okay. One other thing that I want to mention about thesis statements. Thesis statements go in the introduction. Okay. And they go towards the end of the introduction. All right, and we talked about that in the writing process PowerPoint, but I just want to remind you of that again. They should come right before the body of your paper. All right. So then when you're drafting, here's a couple of things you need to decide on. First of all, you need to do some pre-writing. You need to decide what your dominant impression is going to be. You need to decide what your details are going to be and how are you going to organize them first before you start to write. But once you are ready to write, here's a couple things you need to remember. First of all, every body paragraph needs a topic sentence. That is a main idea that tells us what that paragraph's about. Now, if you're doing space, it will probably be, working from my head and moving down to my shoulders, that kind of thing. If you're doing emphatically, it's probably what sense are you going to be discussing in that particular paragraph. All right? You also need transitions to help you move from point to point. That is, how is point A related to point B, and then how is point B related to point C? What transitions do is show your reader the connection between your points, because there needs to be some kind of connection so that your paper is cohesive. The connection is that you're describing parts of yourself. So in this one, in the space one, like I was giving you in the example, your transition and your topic sentence can work together. And so maybe my first sentence of my topics, or my first sentence of my second body paragraph says, moving down from my head, you can see in my core area that I almost always wear some kind of Nike, Under Armour t-shirt, or a shirt that has, a race distance on it. Pretty much all of my casual closet has something to do with running. And then for the next body paragraph, I would moving farther down. So my topic sentence and transitions can work together. All right. Also, be very careful about your verbs. Okay. Because remember, number one, you don't want people to be moving, because we're going to freeze time. There's no time. Time stops. You're not going to tell me a story. I told you I was going to say that a lot. And so your verbs should not show the movement of people or time. Okay, but also, great description many times happens not in adjectives. Remember, adjectives describe your nouns from your parts of speech worksheet. Remember that while adjectives are good, verbs can be better. Okay, and so the smell radiating off my body is a lot better than the smell coming from my body. All right, so great verbs can do 1,000 times more for your description than 10 adjectives could do. So keep track of your verbs. Make sure you're not using a lot of small verbs, a lot of the is, be, okay, am, are verbs. You don't want to do that. Also, you need to make sure that your verbs all stay in the same tense. So if you're going to write in present tense, write in present tense the whole way through. If you're going to write about past tense, because your moment happened in the past that you're describing, then that needs to all happen in the past. So please keep track of that. Make sure you're careful about it, that your verbs all stay in the same tense. All right? Also, remember that you can add figurative language. And the book chapter talks about figurative language. I have page 130. Okay. So take a look at that. See if that's something you can work into it. By figurative language, I mean similes, metaphors, personification. Just a quick review. A simile is comparing two things using like or as. A metaphor is comparing two things without using like or as. And personification is giving person qualities to something that's not a person. So something we talk about a lot is the flag waved. My son loves flags. And so we talk a lot about the flag waved. Well, flags don't actually wave. That's what people do. So that would be an example of personification. All right. So when you're working on this, remember that you need an intro paragraph that also includes your thesis at the very end. Okay. Then we need the body of the paper, which, by the way, will be organized either spatially or emphatically. Okay, and it will also include topic sentences, transitions, specific details that show, don't tell, okay, all of that included, and that hit on the 5 senses. And then finally that you have a conclusion. Now let's talk about the 5 senses for just a second. You don't actually have to hit on all 5. I at least want you to hit on 3 3 of the 5 senses. All right, make sure you do at least 3 of the 5 senses. All right. Finally, you probably want to know, how long does this paper need to be? I do want you to keep this one pretty short. So I'm looking for 1 to 2 pages. So no more than 2 typed pages, double spaced. Please be sure to check out my link that I included on how to format a paper in MLA, because I do expect you to do this in MLA. Okay. 1 to 2 pages for this particular assignment. They'll get longer as we go, but for this one I just want you to keep it pretty short. You will upload this to OneDrive in your group, so make sure that you're putting it in the group. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to email me. I am happy to help you with anything you might need, but I can't help you if I don't know. So let me know if there's anything you need. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Bye.